US military leaders are preparing to brief the president on a set of proposed operations that officials describe as short, sharp, and designed to impose pressure without escalating into a wider war. The discussion centers on Iran, on how far Tehran has moved, how far it still must go in talks over its nuclear program, and what the United States might do if diplomacy stalls. According to multiple accounts, US east-side diplomacy stalls. Central Command has drawn up options that could target Iranian infrastructure, aiming to create leverage that brings Iran back to the negotiating table. These plans are described by sources as a compact series of strikes, powerful enough to be felt, limited enough to be contained, with the explicit objective of changing Tehran's political calculus rather than triggering open regional conflagration. The White House has framed the issue in blunt terms. The president told reporters they have to cry uncle, that is all they have to do. Just say we give up. That line shows the administration's public posture, a demand for demonstrators, but a demonstrable, verifiable movement from Iran on the nuclear file before any broader deal is considered. They have come a long way, the president added. The question is whether or not they will go far enough. He closed the argument with a stark negotiating line. At this moment, there will never be a deal unless they agree there will be nuclear weapons. Those are strong words. And they come wrapped in an operational context that is both consequential and uncertain. Military planners are reportedly weighing a set of options intended to signal resolve, an approach sometimes described as limited coercion. The hope in official language is to push Tehran back to talks with greater flexibility on the nuclear issue. The risk, of course, is that limited strikes can produce unpredictable reactions. Regional actors, proxy groups, and commercial interests watch closely. The danger of miscalculation grows with every move taken in. This crowded theatre. Iran's leadership and its political spokespeople have responded with a mixture of defiance and mockery. One senior Iranian official derided the US approach, taunting that 3 days after any action would pass with no well exploded, a phrase intended to minimize the effectiveness of American threats and underline Tehran's confidence in surviving external pressure. The tone on Tehran's side is calibrated to show resilience and to unsettle the idea that coercive strikes will rapidly bend Iranian policy. On the diplomatic front, the president's reluctance to continue talks under certain conditions set off a weekend of high-stakes maneuvering. US officials pulled back from the second round of negotiations originally planned for Pakistan, arguing that Tehran had not made the kind of concessions Washington deemed necessary. Officials say the decision to step away from the table was driven by a calculation that further engagement without meaningful Iranian arms would yield only cosmetic, short-term commitments. At the same time, there are public reports indicating that the president is considering aggressive steps to keep commercial sea lanes open and to blunt Iran's ability to disrupt maritime traffic. One report suggests the administration has discussed a range of options that include asserting control over portions of the Strait of Hormuz to ensure the flow of shipping and employing special operations forces to secure chokepoints or specific vessels if necessary. Those proposals, whether carried forward or not, speak to the broader element of economic coercion in modern conflict. Control of energy flows and shipping routes is often as powerful a lever as a missile or a radar installation. Market voices and private strategists have already begun to price the geopolitical risks. Some commentators, cited by administration interlocutors, have suggested that a serious disruption in Gulf oil flows could push prices significantly higher. Scenarios that envision crude surging well above current levels. As one private sector advisor put it on the record, next stop $140. IT is not theory, it is mindset. Whether the markets move that far will depend on the actual scope of any disruption, the reaction of buyers and sellers around the world, and the degree to which major producers step in to stabilize supply and reassure markets. The geometry of the region amplifies every provocation. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow corridor through which a substantial portion of the world's seaborne oil passes. Any credible threat to the safe passage of commercial tankers immediately becomes a global economic issue, not just a regional security problem. For shipping firms, insurers, and energy traders, the question is not only whether a strike happens, but how sustained and how disruptive it is. An intermittent, precisely targeted campaign aimed at military or energy infrastructure is different in its impacts from a campaign that disables export terminals or permits widespread attacks on commercial shipping. The legal and political frameworks that govern the use of force will also be part of the administration's calculus. Limited strikes that target military or dual-use facilities raise fewer questions of international law than strikes aimed at purely civilian infrastructure. But even with careful targeting, the consequences, from civilian casualties to escalation through proxies, travel fast. Allies and partners will be asked for political cover, intelligence sharing, basing access, and perhaps logistical support. How Europe, Gulf partners, and other regional actors respond will shape the durability and legitimacy of any operation. Inside Washington, advisors are divided about the likely effectiveness of coercive strikes versus sustained diplomacy. Proponents argue that decisive military signaling can produce political pressure inside Iran that forces hardliners and pragmatic elements alike to fall. They think their posture. Skeptics warn that strikes can entrench the very forces in Tehran that oppose compromise, bolster nationalist narratives, and enable hardline leaders to consolidate power domestically. The administration's public statements and the private advice it receives suggest an attempt to thread this needle, demonstrate the capacity and will to apply pain, but hold back the kind of action that would foreclose a negotiated settlement. Meanwhile, Tehran's rhetoric plays a dual role. It serves as domestic political theatre, reassuring constituencies that Iran can endure American pressure, while also sending signals outward about which forms of escalation will be considered intolerable. Iran's military leadership and its allies in the region possess an array of asymmetric options, from missile and drone strikes to maritime harassment and proxy operations, that can complicate the United States' ability to calibrate a response. That ambiguity of risk gives Tehran lever egg, even when it appears to be on the defensive. The economic side of the equation cannot be ignored. Any sustained disruption of Gulf oil exports would ripple through supply chains and financial markets. Consumer prices, shipping costs, and inflation expectations would all feel the shock, potentially constraining policymakers at home who are watching the economic implications as closely as the military ones. This is part of the reason why Washington's deliberations are so careful. The costs of action extend well beyond the battlefield and are measured in the pocketbooks of citizens and businesses worldwide. At the heart of the debate is the central policy question. The president put plainly, what would it take for Iran to credibly demonstrate that it intends to forswear nuclear weapons? That standard, expressed at the highest level, sets a demanding bar for any diplomatic pathway. It is also a politically resonant line domestically, signaling to audiences at home that the administration aims for a definitive, verifiable resolution rather than a temporary deal. Yet demanding absolute renunciation raises complex verification challenges and may be seen in Tehran as a maximalist precondition that complicates bargaining. The operational choices on the table are varied. They range from cyber and electronic warfare against targeted systems to precise kinetic strikes against specific military or nuclear-related infrastructure to non-kinetic pressure such as economic sanctions and financial measures. Each option carries a different profile of risk and reward. Cyber operations and tailored sanctions can be deniable and reversible. Kinetic options are visible, carry escalation risk, and demand robust contingency planning to limit collateral damage. For ordinary citizens, what happens next will be shaped by a sequence of decisions that will likely be slow and incremental rather than sudden and exhaustive. The President's upcoming briefings will examine intelligence updates. Legal authorities, options for minimizing civilian harm, and measures to protect US forces and regional partners. Senior officials will also be considering diplomatic outreach to allies, to key Gulf states, and to other global players who can exert pressure or offer mediating channels. Those channels matter because unilateral action rarely achieves sustained outcomes in complex international disputes. Even targeted objectives that achieve immediate tactical objectives can leave unresolved the strategic questions that began the confrontation. Success, in any realistic sense, will require a combination of credible deterrence, sustained diplomacy, and robust verification mechanisms that can constrain nuclear activities and reassure regional actors that escalation can be contained. The human story is as important as the strategic one. Civilians in the region face heightened anxiety, and commercial crews and energy sector workers are watching for changes in operational instructions, send insurance rules. Decision makers here at home weigh not only geopolitical considerations, but the day-to-day economic consequences for families and businesses. That reality creates an incentive for restraint and prudence, even as the imperative to deter nuclear proliferation drives urgency. What to watch for in the coming days? First, the scope of the CENTCOM briefing and any decisions about which options, if any, will be put forward for presidential approval. Second, statements from Iran's political and military leadership that could signal whether Tehran is willing to return to substantive talks or intends to dig in. Third, reactions from close allies and Gulf partners whose support or reluctance will shape the feasibility of any operation. Fourth, market indicators, insurance rates for shipping through the Gulf, futures prices for crude and refined products, and the statements of major energy producers that could stabilize or destabilize markets. At stake is more than a single negotiation. The outcome will influence the balance of power in the Middle East, the integrity of non-proliferation norms, the security of commercial shipping, and the economic well-being of consumers around the globe. It is a web of policy, power, and consequence that demands clear-eyed judgment. For now, the administration has framed its approach as a mix of pressure and opportunity. Pressure to extract more meaningful concessions, opportunity to secure a verifiable outcome that prevents the development of nuclear weapons. The president's words make the stakes explicit. He has called for a zero nuclear weapons outcome as a condition for any deal. Whether coercion, diplomacy, or some hybrid will bring Tehran to that point is the central question that will determine the course of events in the weeks ahead.
As deliberations continue, the imperative for clarity remains.
Limited strikes designed to change political calculations can succeed, but only if they are part of a coherent strategy that anticipates the second and third order effects, secures allied support, and leaves a pathway for verifiable and forcible agreements. Absent that coherence, tactical actions risk entrenching opposition rather than producing compromise. The coming days are likely to be heavy with briefings, discreet consultations, and public statements intended to shape expectations. Watchful parties include regional militaries, international organizations, energy markets, and diplomatic capitals around the world. Each will react in its own way, and the sum of those reactions will determine whether pressure produces movement or whether the region settles into another round of standoff and escalation. In the end, the question articulated by the president, whether Iran will go far enough, will be answered not by slogans, but by measurable steps on the ground. The dismantling or permanent verification of nuclear pathways, transparent cooperation with international inspectors, and a demo, foregoing weapons development. The path to that outcome is anything but assured. And the choices made now will echo for years to come. Expect careful, step-by-step decisions, but also prepare for sudden decisions, but also prepare for sudden shifts. This is a moment when diplomacy and deterrence must work in tandem, when political will and military prudence must align, and when the global consequences of local actions are painfully clear. The world will be watching each briefing, each public statement, and each calculated move, because the implications of those moves will be felt far beyond any single headline.